For years, Joel Osteen represented something millions of people believed in. Not just a church, not just a pastor, but an idea. The idea that faith could be warm, that religion didn't have to be frightening, and that God's plan for ordinary people could include joy, success, and a better tomorrow. That idea made him one of the most recognized religious figures on the planet. It filled a 16,800-seat arena every single week. It put his books on bestseller lists for years. It gave him a global television audience that stretched across continents. And for a long time, it seemed like nothing could touch him. But something has changed. The sentence has been handed down. The final chapter of the story people thought they knew about Joel Osteen is now being written, and it looks nothing like anyone expected. To understand where things stand today, you have to go back to the beginning, because the foundation of everything Joel Osteen built was never what most people assumed. He wasn't a trained theologian. He wasn't a seminary graduate with decades of pastoral experience. He was a media producer, a behind-the-scenes strategist who spent nearly 17 years shaping Lakewood Church's television presence without ever standing behind a pulpit. His father, John Osteen, was a preacher. Joel was the architect of the broadcast, the man who understood cameras, audiences, and reached before he ever understood what it meant to lead a congregation. That distinction matters more now than it ever did before, because what Joel Osteen built was not just ministry, it was a brand. And brands, no matter how powerful, have a way of eventually colliding with reality. When his father died suddenly in January 1999, just 6 days after Joel preached his very first sermon, the transition was forced rather than chosen. Joel stepped into the senior pastor role, not because he had spent years preparing for it, but because there was no one else positioned to take it. And rather than try to replicate his father's scripture-heavy, doctrinally intense approach, he did something that would define him forever. He changed the message entirely. He softened it. He made it accessible. He stripped away the parts of traditional Christianity that made people uncomfortable and replaced them with encouragement, positivity, and a vision of faith that felt less like a challenge and more like a warm embrace. For millions of people, that felt like exactly what they needed. But for just as many others, it was the beginning of a very long problem. The prosperity gospel debate followed him from almost the moment he became famous. While he always tried to distance himself from the label, calling himself an encourager rather than a teacher of well-focused theology, the connection was impossible to ignore. His sermons told people that God wanted them to succeed. That favor was available to those who believed that a better life, a healthier life, a more abundant life, was not just possible, but expected for those who put their faith in the right place. Those ideas resonated with audiences who had been told for years that suffering was inevitable, that hardship was their portion, and that expecting anything better was somehow spiritually arrogant. Joel gave them permission to want more, and that permission made him extraordinarily powerful. But it also made him extraordinarily vulnerable to the moment when reality refused to cooperate with the message. That moment came in ways that even his most loyal supporters struggled to explain away. The first real crack in the image appeared during a national television interview where he was asked a straightforward question about salvation. It was the kind of question any pastor should be able to answer clearly, without hesitation, without ambiguity. Joel couldn't do it. He responded with caution, with inclusive language, with a kind of careful phrasing designed to offend no one and comfort everyone. The backlash was immediate. Critics from across the theological spectrum pointed out that he had sidestepped the central claim of the faith he was supposed to represent. He issued a clarification days later, but the damage was done, not because he had said something wrong, but because he had revealed something true. When the moment demanded clarity, he chose comfort, and people noticed. Then Hurricane Harvey arrived in August 2017, and everything that had been building beneath the surface finally broke through. The storm devastated Houston. Entire neighborhoods disappeared underwater. Families lost everything they owned in a matter of hours. Thousands of people were left with nowhere to go. And Lakewood Church, sitting inside a former professional basketball arena with enough space to shelter an entire community, initially kept its doors closed. The explanation offered was that the building had flooded and was inaccessible. But photographs and videos began circulating online almost immediately, and what people saw did not match what they were being told. The public reaction was not just frustration. It was fury. It was the kind of anger that doesn't go away because it doesn't come from confusion. It comes from disappointment. People had believed in Joel Osteen. They had defended him against critics. They had told others that he was the real thing. And in the moment that belief was tested, they felt abandoned. When the church did eventually open and shelter hundreds of displaced residents, the response came too late to change the story. Joel appeared on national programs and explained his reasoning. He talked about safety concerns, about waiting for guidance from city officials, about the logistics of opening a building that size in the middle of an active disaster. Some of what he said was reasonable, but the way he said it landed poorly. He pointed to social media as the source of a misleading narrative, and in doing so, he made it clear that he still did not fully understand what people were actually upset about. They weren't upset about logistics. They were upset about priorities. And no amount of careful explanation was going to close that gap. The financial questions came next, and they were harder to dismiss than anything that had come before. Lakewood Church operated with an annual budget reported at nearly $90 million. It employed hundreds of staff members. It maintained a global media presence that cost significant resources to sustain. Yet, independent watchdog organizations consistently gave the church failing marks for financial transparency. Because Lakewood operates as a tax-exempt religious organization, it is not required to disclose detailed financial records to the public. That legal reality is common for churches. But at Lakewood's scale, it created a culture of opacity that became increasingly difficult to defend. Reports emerged suggesting that less than 1.5% of the church's annual income went directly to charitable causes. That figure, approximately $1.2 million out of nearly $90 million, became a rallying point for critics who argued that an institution of that size had an obligation to do far more. And then came the story that seemed too strange to be real. In 2014, Lakewood had reported the theft of roughly $600,000 in cash and checks from the church safe. The investigation stalled. No arrests were made. The case went cold. And then in November 2021, a plumber doing routine maintenance inside the building removed part of a bathroom wall and found hundreds of envelopes stuffed with cash, checks, and money orders. Investigators confirmed that evidence from those envelopes appeared connected to the original theft. Because the statute of limitations had expired, no charges could be filed. The explanation that emerged was that someone had hidden the money intending to retrieve it and simply never did. People heard that explanation and did not know what to do with it. It wasn't the kind of story that a clarification could clean up. It was the kind of story that made people wonder what else they didn't know. The PPP loan controversy arrived shortly after and compounded everything. During the global shutdown, when in-person services were suspended and congregations everywhere were figuring out how to survive financially, Lakewood applied for and received $4.4 million in federal Paycheck Protection Program funds. The program existed to help organizations retain their employees during a period of extreme uncertainty, and on paper, the application made sense. In practice, it made people angry in a way that was entirely predictable and entirely avoidable. Here was one of the wealthiest and most visible religious institutions in the country, led by a man whose personal net worth was estimated in the tens of millions, accepting government assistance that had been designed for struggling small businesses and nonprofits. The response from the public was not nuanced. It was a simple question asked by millions of people at the same time. Why? Joel Osteen never provided an answer that satisfied that question, and that pattern of explanations that address the logistics while missing the point emotionally had by that stage become the defining characteristic of his public persona. He was always prepared. He was always polished. He always had a reason, but the reasons never seemed to connect with the feeling people were reacting to. And when the feeling is strong enough, reasons stop working. Then came the shooting. On a Sunday afternoon in February, between scheduled services, a woman entered Lakewood Church carrying a long rifle. She had a young child with her. She opened fire inside the building. 2 off-duty law enforcement officers working security responded immediately and engaged her. She was killed at the scene. The child she had brought with her suffered a critical gunshot wound to the head and required emergency surgery. A man inside the church was struck in the leg. The investigation that followed confirmed that the shooter had a documented history of mental illness and had made statements during the incident suggesting she believed she had a bomb, though no explosives were found. The timing of the attack, between services rather than during them, meant that the building was not at full capacity. Investigators and church representatives both acknowledged that the death toll could have been catastrophically higher if the situation had unfolded 30 minutes later. Joel Osteen addressed the community in the aftermath with what appeared to be genuine grief. He spoke about the tragedy in personal terms. He acknowledged the fear and devastation felt by those inside the building. He recognized the officers who had acted with speed and courage. For a brief moment, the controversy surrounding him fell away, and what remained was something more human. A man standing in front of a wound that had nothing to do with optics or messaging or public relations. But that moment did not last, because the context surrounding it never disappeared. The shooting had happened inside an institution that had spent years accumulating public distrust. And distrust, once established, shapes the way every new event is interpreted, even tragedy. What the final sentence looks like for Joel Osteen is not a courtroom verdict. It is not a single event that can be pointed to as the moment everything ended. It is something slower and more permanent than that. It is a judgment that forms in the minds of millions of people over years, as they watch someone they once believed in fail the same test in slightly different forms over and over again. The test is not about theology. It is not about money or safety protocols or federal loan eligibility. The test is simpler than any of those things. It is the question of whether the person standing at the front of the room actually believes what they are saying, whether the life they are living reflects the values they are preaching, whether the institution they are leading serves something larger than itself. And on that test, for a growing number of people, the answers become clear. The goodbye that is happening around Joel Osteen is not loud or dramatic. It does not look like a single moment of collapse. It looks like churches quietly removing his books from their shelves. It looks like donors redirecting their giving to organizations that publish their financial records. It looks like former supporters answering interview questions with long pauses before they speak. It looks like an audience that once numbered in the millions slowly, steadily, choosing something else, not because they stopped believing in faith, but because they started believing that faith deserved better than what they had been given. The man himself has not disappeared. He continues to preach. He continues to publish. His face still appears on screens around the world, still smiling, still encouraging, still telling people that their best days are ahead. And for some, that message still lands. There will always be people who find comfort in what he offers, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But the broader cultural moment has shifted beneath him in a way that cannot be reversed. The questions are louder now than the answers. The scrutiny is sharper now than the explanations. And the trust that once made all of it possible is no longer something he can count on automatically.